They thought I'd never find out. They thought a dead grandfather's ranch, buried in 50-year-old paperwork, was theirs to sell behind closed doors. $50 million. My land. My name still on a deed they forgot existed. And in 9 minutes I was going to walk into their meeting and prove it. And if you haven't subscribed to HOA Breakpoints yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you definitely don't want to miss the next story. Trust me, it gets even crazier from here. My name's Cole Whitfield, and the Whitfield Ranch had been in my family since 1961. 4,800 acres of Montana grassland, cattle trails, and a farmhouse my grandfather built with his own hands. When he passed, the land sat in a my trust, while I finished deployments overseas and later a divorce that gutted my finances and my focus. That's when the ranch quietly got folded into a newly formed regional land co-op, managed under the umbrella of the Silver Pines HOA. On paper, it sounded harmless. Administrative, a formality to handle shared water rights with neighboring properties. I didn't think much of it. I trusted the board, I trusted the paperwork my ex-lawyer filed. That trust is exactly what they were counting on, because while I was 3 time zones away, they were quietly preparing the biggest land sale in county history. It started with a phone call from my cousin who still lives 2 counties over. "Cole," she said, "there's a construction crew surveying your dad's land." I laughed it off until I checked the county auction records myself. There it was, Whitfield Ranch. Sold, $49.8 million, wired to an account controlled by the Silver Pines HOA Land Management Trust. The buyer, a resort developer planning a private mountain enclave. I read the sale documents 3 times, waiting for my name to appear somewhere, a signature, an approval, anything. It never did. Instead, there was a single line buried on page 14, property reclassified under Association Stewardship per Bylaw Amendment 12C, approved by board vote, absentee owner notified via certified mail. I never received a letter. Not one. They'd used an old forwarding address from a house I sold 6 years earlier, an address they had no legitimate reason to still have on file. They didn't sell my ranch by accident. They engineered it. And they needed me to stay exactly where I was, unaware and 3,000 miles away. Here's the part they didn't count on. Buried in a fireproof box in my grandfather's old bank vault was a second deed, one the HOA's lawyers never knew existed, filed under a totally different parcel number back in 1961. I wouldn't find it for another 6 days. But when I did, everything they'd built started to collapse. I flew home immediately. My first stop wasn't the HOA office, it was the county recorder's building, a place I hadn't set foot in since I was a kid, trailing behind my grandfather while he paid property taxes in cash. The clerk pulled every filing tied to the Whitfield name. Most of it matched the HOA's story, clean, procedural, board approved. But something felt off. The reclassification bylaw they cited had been passed at a meeting with only 4 board members present, 2 short of the quorum required by their own charter. I photographed every page. Then I remembered the bank vault. My grandfather was a man who never trusted paperwork he couldn't touch, so alongside his original 1961 land patent, he'd filed a secondary deed directly with the state, completely separate from the HOA's records, completely outside their reach. I drove 2 hours to the state archive. The clerk there barely blinked when she slid the certified copy across the counter. Original, parcel deed. My grandfather's signature. My name listed as sole surviving beneficiary of the trust. Notarized 8 months before the H.O.A. even existed as an entity. They hadn't just skipped a quorum, they had sold land they legally never had full authority over. And I was holding the one document that proved it. Now, if you're just joining partway through, quick catch-up. An HOA board sold my family's 4,800-acre ranch for $50 million while I was out of state. Using a fake mailing address and a vote that broke their own bylaws, I just found the one deed that could undo the entire sale. And that night, I got a call I wasn't supposed to get, an invitation to their emergency board meeting. Word travels fast in a small county. Someone at the recorder's office must have mentioned my visit, because by 6 that evening the H.O.A. A board president, Marlene Askew, had called an emergency session closed to the public, held in the community center they used for holiday potlucks and budget votes. I wasn't invited. That was the point. They wanted this handled quietly, votes rubber-stamped, records cleaned up before anyone outside their 5-person board caught wind of the problem. But I'd spent 6 years overseas learning that the element of surprise wins more battles than firepower ever does. I put the certified deed, the notarized 1961 patent, and a printed timeline of their quorum violation into a single folder. Then I called my cousin, told her to bring her phone and start recording the second I walked through that door. The community center parking lot was full, every board member's car, plus 2 I didn't recognize, likely the developer's people, there to finalize the last paperwork on the sale. I walked in without knocking. The room went silent mid-sentence. Marlene was standing at the head of the table, mid-explanation to the buyer's representative about minor title formalities still being finalized. "Cole," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is a closed session." "I know," I said, setting the folder on the table. "That's usually what happens when people don't want witnesses." I slid the certified deed across the table first, then the notarized 1961 patent. Then the printout showing their own bylaws required 5 board members for any reclassification vote, and their vote had only 4. Nobody said anything for a long moment. The developer's representative picked up the deed, read the parcel number twice, then looked up at Marlene with an expression that told me everything I needed to know he hadn't known either. "This sale," I said, "was never yours to make. My grandfather made sure of that 60 years ago, whether you knew it or not." Marlene's hand was shaking when she reached for her water glass. The emergency meeting they'd called to protect the sale had just become the meeting that unraveled it. "This has to be a misunderstanding," Marlene said, but her voice had lost its authority. "The trust documents we received clearly listed the association as what?" I interrupted. "Steward? Show me where my grandfather or I ever signed that authority over to you." Silence. The developer's rep set down the folder. "I need to speak with my legal team before we go any further," he said, already standing, already reaching for his coat. "This deal is on hold." One of the other board members, a quiet man named Harold who'd barely spoken in the 6 years I'd known him, finally looked up. "I voted against the reclassification," he said. "I told you we didn't have quorum, Marlene." That single sentence changed the entire room. It wasn't just me against the board anymore. It was the board against itself. "We were trying to generate revenue for the community," Marlene said, quieter now. "The infrastructure fund, the road repairs." "You don't fund community roads," I said, "by selling a dead man's ranch out from under his grandson and hoping he never notices." I picked my folder back up. "The sale is void. And starting tomorrow, so is this board, at least the 4 of you who broke your own rules to make it happen." Within 72 hours, the county attorney's office had opened a formal review. The $50 million sale was frozen pending investigation, and 2 weeks later, formally voided. Marlene and 2 other board members resigned before the county could force a recall vote. Harold, the one dissenting voice, was asked by neighboring landowners to step in as interim board president, a request he accepted. On one condition, full financial transparency, permanently. The developer's company sent a formal apology and, oddly enough, a standing offer if I ever chose to sell the ranch myself. Legitimately, they'd still be interested. I told them I'd think about it. My grandfather didn't build that land for a resort. Not yet anyway, maybe not ever. Remember that second deed I mentioned, the one buried in the vault? It turns out my grandfather didn't file it out of paranoia. He'd survived almost this exact scheme once before, back in 1974, with a different board and a different buyer. He just never got the chance to walk into his own emergency meeting. I got that chance for both of us. If you want to hear how it happened to him first, that story's coming next on HOA Breakpoints. Don't miss it.